When you really take an active role in managing your personal brand, you can do so much more for your career, for opening opportunities, and for being surprised about the magic that comes in because you found some clarity about the foundation of what you offer without apology. Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm your host, Tosca DiMatteo, and today we're talking about managing your personal brand, part 2. If you're new to the podcast, let me first say I'm so glad you're here. I'm Tosca DiMatteo, and I'm the founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting. The work I do is to help folks and organizations through career transformations. I do this at the deepest layers of the work. I heal wounds. I don't apply Band-Aids. If you want to learn more about how I can support you or your organization, please visit coachtosca.com. All right. So I mentioned this is part 2 of a 3-part series about managing a personal brand. And I started off last time with talking to you about why it's important to manage your personal brand. So if you missed it, definitely go back because I want you to be convinced that this is something worth taking the time to do for your career. But alas, this part is meant to kind of share my perspective on what personal branding actually is and to kind of simplify it a bit because I think we can make anything complex and feel overwhelming these days. So let's not do that, shall we? So look, a personal brand really comes down to 2 factors. The first is, who are you being? And the second is, what can you help with? So your personal brand is really an expression and an articulation of these things at its very simple level. And your personal brand is not something that operates in a vacuum, right? It operates in a world and in a context and within structures and systems. So what that means is personal brands are always evolving and they're always being shifted and moved around, and things are being dialed up and dialed down based on where you are and also what it is that you want and where you're going in terms of your destination with your brand. So it's kind of very flowy and it's not static. And I think this is important to kind of understand because I think people feel like, oh, I have to really like nail this one articulation of my brand. And, or, this, oh gosh, the prevalence of like the whole elevator pitch, like gag me with a spoon. Like the minute we start like repeating the same thing over and over, is like the minute we die on the vine, in my opinion. Personal brand is not about having some rehearsed one liner that we can then share in 15 seconds in an elevator or, on a Zoom call. A personal brand is expansive and there's no finite point to put on it. And I want to also just express that it's always evolving. And so, yes, you can come to a place where you feel good. Like, I get the foundation of my brand. Like, I get it. And you need to constantly look at it. I don't want to say constantly because that feels overwhelming, but I think you need to take a hard look from time to time and say, hey, does this still hold true? Is this still who I am and what I'm good at and what I help with? And so, with that foundation, I'll just go a little bit deeper into these 2 arenas. So, the first piece is what I think is primarily deprioritized in today's corporate environments. And unfortunately, sometimes even in the world of service. But you, as a personal brand, are a service, right? You are your product. And so, because of that, the humanness in you being the product, we have to prioritize understanding who we are being as a brand. That is really everything because, sure, we can have different skill sets, different combinations of skill sets as humans, But really, really what comes down to the differentiation is you. You are the difference in your brand. And this is why you hear people say over and over, it doesn't matter how many people do the thing that you do or talk about the thing that you talk about. What matters is that it's your unique perspective, which is not repeatable. And that's why it's important for you to bring your voice to the table because it is extremely unique and it's needed, right? So if we consider that our personal brand first and foremost is about who we are being, it ladders to that famous quote that says, people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. That's the essence of personal brand. Really, you have to ask yourself, who am I being when I show up into these rooms and into these spaces? Am I showing up open and curious? Am I showing up and being present in the moment? Am I on my computer at the same time I'm engaged in a conversation? Who are you being? Because that's a big part of how you're representing your brand. It's part and parcel to if people want to work with you, right? If they want to receive the services you have is because of who you are when you show up. There's a whole host of questions that you can ask yourself to really be clear about who you are when we're considering it in the context of branding, right? Like, are you someone who's direct and clear in your work, or do you send confusing messages? Do you show up as yourself, or do you show up as who you're supposed to be? Are you empowering others, or are you controlling and in resentment, right? These are the kinds of things that we have to ask ourselves. And if we are showing up in a way that we don't want to represent our brand, then that's where that deep inner work comes. And we have to start to excavate, well, how do I be the person I want to be in these environments? How do I not be that stressed out person who's leaking all their crap over everybody else and creating a toxic environment, for example? Right. So, this is really why I do what I do, right? Because at the end of the day, when I work with clients one on one, so much of it has to do with, they actually want to show up differently. They don't necessarily come to me and say, hey, help me to like show up differently, but they come and they say, I'm stuck and I'm not getting to where I want to be. And 99% of the time, the reason is because they're not able to show up in a way that they feel good about because of a host of reasons, which I won't go into. But by doing that work, by understanding like, who do I want to be when I show up in these rooms, we can then be intentional. And that intentionality is really the foundation of how people receive our brand. Part of this also comes down to asking yourself questions like, what boundaries do you set and hold? Because your boundaries or lack thereof are also a part of your brand, right? Think about it. If you're the one that always says yes, then you're the one that everybody's always going to go to. And that's a choice if that's who you want to be and what you want your brand to represent. The person that always says yes. And oftentimes, this is what happens by default because we're not cognizant of the fact that I want to be the person, for example, that is discerning about what I'm saying yes to, that aligns with what I'm here to do, aligns with where I'm trying to grow to, and that honors that I have finite capacity. And if that's the kind of brand that you want to be, then you may have to start making different decisions if you're currently a yes person. This really is your differentiator, who you are, how you show up, how you move in the world, how you interact with people, how you respond to people. Are you explosive or not? It's all part of what people are going to say about you when you're not in the room. And that, my friends, is your brand. That is your reputation. All right. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down. So I'll move to the second piece. And that is answering the question, what can you help with? And this is often easier for people to kind of assess and talk about. It's easier for us to identify our skills because this is what society has focused on for so long. It's the what of our brand. And the focus is not so much on the how. And I think that that's why we're in a lot of the conundrums that we're in, but I digress. I won't get on that soapbox right now. But what you can help with are your superpowers. And the piece about this that I'll share is that we can sometimes get in like this linear thinking about it, and we can get into these boxes and use our industry logo, or I'm sorry, our industry terms and lingo. And what I want to invite you to do in this is go beyond industry terms and industry skill sets, go into this idea of connecting your different skill sets so you can discover new ones that kind of paint a picture that is not so much in the weeds, but kind of more seeing the bigger picture. And part of that can be considering the context in which you use these skills to help with problems. So, for example, you may be really great at being creative with financial solutions, and you may realize that actually you are really good when you're in situations that are ambiguous. And by seeing it with the context, then you can more easily articulate, gosh, yeah, what are my superpowers and what are the problems and situations that I can really add a lot of value to? That first bit is like really go deep with the skills and the abilities and the problems that you solve. The second piece is to consider this not just within your career, but across your entire life and your different arenas. So, whether it's hobbies, your home life, whether it's volunteer roles, side hustles, caretaker responsibilities, health and wellness practices, even consider how you serve and what you help with, because we are really not meant to be compartmentalized human beings. And so when you are thinking about your personal brand, even though you may be thinking about it in terms of your career, your personal brand is bigger than that. And so I want you to take a step back and say, yeah, what do I help with outside of my job? Where do I serve outside of my job? What are the superpowers that I use? And you may start to realize, oh, actually, there's this great skill set that I have that I'm not actually using or really talking about in my work environment. And there's an opportunity to strengthen my brand and strengthen my offerings. This is just a really simplified look at what your brand is, right? I don't even want you to think about, well, how do I articulate it? What's my elevator pitch? I don't want you to even think about that right now. For this moment, I want you to sit with, what does it mean if my personal brand is this beautiful combination of who I'm being and what I help with? How would I start to think about myself? How would I start to look at my brand with this new lens? Because next time is when I'm going to start talking to you about, now what? Now that I understand what my personal brand is, how do I start to manage it and work with it and all the good stuff? But for now, I hope that this helped you in understanding, you know what, personal brand, it doesn't have to be the big scary thing, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just really understanding the answer to these two questions. And by doing that, you can start to get more clarity with what your brand is. And we'll talk more about that next time. So tune in next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. It's been so great to have you in the lab. I'm really glad you're here because I think that when you really take an active role in managing your personal brand, you can do so much more for your career, for opening opportunities, and for being surprised about the magic that comes in because you found some clarity about the foundation of what you offer without apology and in your full knowing that you're awesome. So if you have any questions about this or anything to share, please don't be afraid to reach out. I love to hear from you. You can find me at coachtosca.com. And until next time, ciao for now.